The wagon came to a stop at the edge of the 12-acre plot, and for a long moment Helena Ostergaard could not make her children look at what she had brought them to. The land was mostly slope and stone, ground that tipped toward the Kalapuya tributary like a poured plate, and the only flat patch was owned by a tree. An Oregon white oak, 300 years old by Lishka's later count, 6 feet of trunk at chest height. A canopy that spread 50 feet in every direction and turned the September light into something that felt older than the land it fell on. "Mama," Metty said, 5 years old and already unimpressed by silence, "is this where we live now?" Eric, 7, said nothing. He only watched his mother's hands. He had learned in the 18 months since his father's death to watch her hands for what her face would not say. Helena climbed down. She walked to the oak and put her palm flat against the bark and felt, for the first time since the pneumonia had taken Jen's, something under her fingers that was not grief. She heard the horse before she saw the rider. Mr. Clayton Ashford sat his saddle like a man who had been doing it for 45 years and still enjoyed the attention. His coat was Portland wool. His pocket watch chain was too clean for the road. He tipped his hat to her and smiled the smile of a man who had already counted the boards inside her tree. "Mrs. Ostergaard, my condolences on your husband. Thank you, Mr. Ashford. I'll save us both the afternoon. $40 cash today for the 12 acres. More than any fair man would pay for rock and roots." He nodded toward the oak. "I'll even clear the stump for you." She did not answer. His smile widened a quarter-inch. "There's also the matter of a $28 debt your late husband owed the Sweet Home feed store. I hold the note now. Mr. Whittle at the bank expects payment in 30 days or we go to auction. I mention it only because it affects what you can hope to get." He touched his hat brim and turned his horse. Before he was fully gone, he added without looking back, "2 children on rocky ground, ma'am. Think about them before you think about pride." Helena did not move until the hoofbeats were gone. The carpenter came an hour later, Erasmus Cole, the nearest one, riding the road back from a job in Brownsville. He looked at the oak. He looked at her. He laughed without meanness, only with the certainty of a man who knew his trade. "Build around that? Tree grows a quarter-inch a year, ma'am. It moves. It pushes. It'll tear your walls apart in 3 seasons. Nobody builds around a living thing. Sell to Ashford. It's the only honest advice I've got for you." He rode on. Matt tugged Helena's apron. "Mama, where will we sleep when the rain comes?" The rains came to the Willamette Valley in October. 4 months away, 45 inches a year, most of it between October and May. A cedar shake cabin took $85 of hauled lumber to build. She had $87 hidden in a tin box inside the wagon. She had 8 days of wagon food. She had 2 children and a debt and a tree she refused to sell. She knelt down to Meta's level. She did not lie to her daughter, never had, never would. "I do not know yet," she said. "But I am going to know by sundown tomorrow." Eric slipped his hand into hers. His grip was stronger than she remembered a 7-year-old's being. It occurred to her, watching the light come sideways through the oak's leaves and fallen coins across his hair, that her son had been the man of the family for 18 months and nobody had asked him whether he wanted the job. She stood up. She looked up into the oak. And because she was Henrik Ostergaard's daughter, and because Henrik had built ships in Copenhagen Harbor for 40 years, she did not see a problem. She saw a frame. She did not sleep that night. She sat by the wagon lantern with a scrap of slate and a piece of charcoal, and she drew. Her father had taught her to draw a boat from the keel up. First the spine, Henrik used to say in his slow English, then the ribs, then the skin. He had carried her on his shoulders through the Copenhagen shipyards from the time she was 5, and by 8 she could name every joint on a hull. By 12, she could cut a mortise and tenon clean enough for him to nod once, which was the highest praise he gave anyone, wood or human. By 17, she had sailed for America with his joinery chest and his worn teak rule in her trunk. She drew the yoke in the center of the slate. She drew 4 thick horizontal branches that grew 12 feet above the ground. She drew, across those branches, 8 radiating beams, 6 inches by 6 inches, 14 feet long, like the ribs of a very small upside-down ship. She drew a circular floor. She drew a wall that breathes around the trunk instead of pressing against it. She drew sliding joints. Henrik's voice came back clearer than the lantern. A good joint does not fight the wood. It moves with it. Nails are a lazy man's shortcut, Helena. A true joint is a handshake between 2 pieces of wood. By morning, she had a design. By mid-morning, she had walked half a mile downstream to meet the woman Mr. Cole, the carpenter, had mentioned, only to dismiss, the old Kalapuya woman who lives by the creek. Strange one, keeps to herself. Grandmother Lishka was 68. Gray hair in a single braid. A woven plant fiber shawl over a dark wool dress. A stone pendant on a leather cord. She was sitting on her porch, shelling last year's acorns into a wooden bowl when Helena came up the path, and she looked at Helena the way a person looks at a letter that has finally arrived. You are the widow with the oak. Yes. Sit. Helena sat. Mette climbed onto her lap without being told. Eric stood at the porch edge and watched a blue-winged bird scold its mate in the alder. Lishka asked no questions for some time. Shelled 6 more acorns. Then she said, "That tree was old when my grandmother was small. Her mother's people camped under it in the autumn, because the acorns from that particular oak were sweeter than the others. 300 pounds a year, some years. It fed 4 families until the settlers came and said the land was empty. I want to build my home in it," Helena said. "Not beside it, in it." Lishka did not blink. She handed Mette an acorn to hold. She said, "Show me the drawing." Helena showed her the slate. Lishka looked at it for a long time. Then she put her finger on the sliding cedar collar Helena had drawn around the trunk, the loose-fit band with the 2-inch expansion gap that her father's ship joinery would have called a floating coupling. She tapped it twice. "This," she said, "this is the part everyone else will miss. Everyone else says I cannot build there at all. Everyone else," Lishka said, "has never asked the tree." She did not say it the way a mystic says it. She said it the way a woman who had lived 70 years beside these oaks says it, a statement of practical fact. A main branch of a mature Gary oak, she said, held the weight of a black bear. She had seen it herself as a girl. The canopy shed water out to the drip line and kept the ground beneath it dry in storms that drowned the meadow. Acorns could be leached into flour. Deadfall from this oak alone was more than a cord a year, cut for free by the wind. Met had fallen asleep on Helena's shoulder. Lishka watched the child sleep. Then she said softly, "I will teach your girl the acorn work. You teach your son the joinery. The oak will do the rest. Bring the slate tomorrow and I will show you where the main branches take the most weight." Helena rode into Sweet Home the next morning. She sold Jens's old saddle in Eugene for $19. She paid the $28 feed store debt to Mr. Whittle at the bank in cash. The banker looked startled. He wrote the receipt with a careful hand. When she walked out onto the street, Clayton Ashford was standing on the boardwalk across from the bank. He was no longer smiling. The kitchen of the old tilted tool shed on her property was the only roof Helena had that week. She cleared the packing dust off a board laid across 2 barrels, set the lantern in the center, and called Eric and Mette to the table. "We are going to build a house," she said, "but not on the ground." Met blinked. "In the tree?" "In the tree?" Eric, who had inherited his mother's ability to keep his face still, said, "Show us." She laid out the slate. She drew with the charcoal as she spoke. The platform would sit 12 feet above the ground, resting on the oak's 4 main lower branches, each of them 14 inches thick at the trunk end, each of them capable of holding the weight of a bear according to Lishka, and therefore capable of holding the weight of a cabin. 8 radial beams would come off a cedar collar fitted around the trunk. The beams would be 6 inches by 6 inches, 14 feet long each. They would not touch the tree with any iron. No nails, no bolts. Only wood on wood, chisel cut, pegged with oak dowels. The trunk will grow a 1/4 inch wider every year, she said. So the collar must float. 2-inch gap all around. The gap lets the tree breathe and grow. We carve the seat of each beam to slide inward as the tree pushes outward. Your grandfather built ships this way. The hull flexes with the sea. It does not break. What do I do? Eric asked. You fetch water. You hold the plank steady when I cut. You hand me the pegs in order. You will also set rabbit snares in the north hedge. Lishka showed me where. What do I do? Mede asked. You collect straight sticks this long. Helena marked the slate for the pegs. You sort them by thickness. And grandmother Lishka is going to teach you how to turn acorns into flour. You will feed us through the winter with that work. Met sat up straighter than she had sat in her entire 5 years. I will be the acorn girl. You will be the acorn girl. That night, when the children were asleep in the wagon, Helena walked down the road in the moonlight to Mr. Rasmussen's farm. The Rasmussens were Danish like her, the only Danish family within 20 miles. Mrs. Rasmussen's kitchen shelves had collapsed under a sack of flour the month before, and her husband did not have the hands for fine joinery. Helena offered to rebuild the shelves, 5 tiers hardwood pegged, in 2 days of work. In exchange, she asked for the use of his draft horse for 1 morning, enough seasoned oak from his collapsed barn to make 8 6-by-6-inch beams 14 feet long, and 1 day of neighbor labor to help her lift the first beam into position. Old Mr. Rasmussen looked at her in the lantern light for a long time. Ashford will try to stop this. He already tried. You paid the debt. Yes. Then he has only his words left. Yes. Mr. Rasmussen nodded slowly. You tell me when you need the horse. She walked home under the Willamette stars. 3 days later, Clayton Ashford rode past her plot and saw no foundation trench, no stone pile, no stacked lumber on the ground. She was sitting under the oak with her children. To Clayton, this looked like a widow who had surrendered and was only working up the courage to sign the papers. He smiled at his foreman Hoyt. She's given up. Good. Saves us the court cost. He was already composing his next offer in his head. $30, he thought. She'll take 30. He rode on, never looking up. Above his head, 12 feet above his head, Helena Ostergaard was marking in charcoal, on the underside of the oak's largest lower branch, the exact spot where the first beam seat would be carved. Her son was holding the end of the measuring string. Her daughter was counting acorns into a basket. Mr. Ashford was looking in the wrong direction. The 3 cedar logs Jens had cut and never milled were seasoned now, 14 months in the open, moisture gone, grain tight. Helena split the first log with a froe and a 5-pound mallet one morning at sunrise, and by noon she had 12 planks, each 1.25 inches thick, each bleeding the clean, sharp smell of cedar into the summer air. Eric brought her water from the Calapuea tributary, 1/2 mile each way, 8 trips a day. He did not complain. He was 7, and he was carrying 2-quart pails that splashed against his shins with every step, and the second week his palms blistered just like hers, and the third week they calused, and by the 4th week he was carrying the full load without spilling. Met sat with a growing pile of straight hazel sticks, sorting them by diameter into 3 baskets, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, muttering the measurements to herself like a song. When she got bored, she ran the half-mile downstream to Lishka, who was teaching her to pound acorn meat in a stone mortar, leach the tannins through 4 changes of cold water, and dry the flour on a canvas in the sun. The first main beam went up on a Tuesday. Mr. Rasmussen brought his draft horse, Big Olaf, and his oldest son, Peter, and 2 ropes. It took 3 hours to hoist the first oak beam into its carved seat in the cedar collar 12 feet up. When the beam finally settled and Helena tapped its tenon into the mortise with the mallet and heard the sound, that particular dry talk her father had taught her to listen for, the sound of a joint that was going to hold for 100 years. She sat down on the grass and laughed until she cried. Peter Rasmussen, who was 17 and had never seen a woman cry and laugh at the same time, looked at his father in alarm. His father said quietly in Danish, "She's hearing her own father's voice. Boy, let her alone." She carved the mortises at sunrise. 1.5 inch wide, 2 inches deep, cut with a chisel that had belonged to Henrik and had Copenhagen steel in it. She shaped the tenons with a draw knife her mother had bought her for her 10th birthday. Every joint was fitted dry 3 times before it was pegged. The peg was never the thing holding the joint. The joint held itself. The peg only kept it from walking. 14 hours a day, 5 days a week. On the 7th day she rested, because her mother had taught her that. On the 7th evening she walked down to Lishka's and sat on the porch and let the old woman wrap her cracked palms in bear grass poultice. Halfway through the 2nd month, Medi came and stood beside her on the scaffold while Helena carved the 4th mortise. The child was silent for a long time. Then she said, in the matter-of-fact voice of a 5-year-old who had been thinking all morning, "Mama, why don't we just let the man have the tree? Then we could buy a regular house." Helena set down the chisel. She sat on the edge of the platform boards and lifted Matt onto her lap and pointed up into the canopy. "Matt, do you see the little hollow where the squirrels go in and out?" "Yes. There are baby squirrels in that hollow right now. Their mother made them." She trusted this tree. "Do you see the nest up higher, where the crow sits?" "Yes. Crows pick the strongest trees. That tree has been picked by crows for 300 years. It is a home for many families. We are not its owners. We are its neighbors." What's a neighbor? A neighbor is someone who helps what is beside them. A good neighbor does not take. A good neighbor stays. Papa was a good neighbor to us. He will always be a good neighbor. That is why we do not forget him. This tree is being a good neighbor to us by letting us live here. So we are good neighbors back. We do not sell it for coin. We do not hurt it for comfort. We live with it. We are a neighbor to what we want to keep. Matt considered this. Then she nodded, climbed down, went back to her basket, and continued sorting 1/2-inch pegs. Helena picked up the chisel and cut the 5th mortise clean the first time. By the 45th day, all 8 radial beams were seated in the collar. By the 50th day, the platform floor was laid, split cedar planks, tongue and groove, fitted dry so that any single board could be replaced without touching its neighbors. By the 52nd day, the wall plates were pegged, and the vertical studs of the wraparound wall were rising out of the platform like the ribs of a round boat built upside down in the sky. It was Eric who first realized the shape of what they were making. He was handing her a stud. She was on the platform. He was on the ladder, and he said suddenly, "Mama, it's round." "Yes, houses aren't round. Ours is." He thought about this the rest of the afternoon. That night at supper, he said, without preamble, "A round house has no corners. Corners are where cold comes in. Papa said that." Helena set down her spoon. She had forgotten Jens said that. Jens had said it the one winter they had the tight square cabin in the Eugene bottom. The winter Medi was a baby, and the wind came through the east corner no matter how many rags they stuffed into the joint. She had forgotten he had said it, and her son had remembered. "Your papa was right," she said. A round house has no corners. 3 days later, Maddie climbed the temporary rope ladder for the first time. She had been forbidden to until the platform was fully decked and railed, and she had obeyed for the full 58 days. On the 59th morning, she came up the ladder, without permission, and stood on the cedar planks 12 feet off the ground and turned in a slow full circle and saw, for the first time in her 5-year life, the shape of the world from above. She shouted so loudly that the crow flew out of its nest. "Mama, I can see the mountains. I know. The mountains are blue. The Cascades, yes. Mom, the sky is bigger up here." Helena did not correct her. The sky was bigger up there. Every child knew what adults forgot. That was the afternoon Clayton Ashford rode out for his inspection. He expected an abandoned plot and a widow ready to sell for $30. He had even folded 3 $10 notes into his breast pocket so he could produce them with a flourish. He rode up the track expecting silence. What he heard first was a child shouting about mountains. What he saw when he rounded the last bend was a ring of cedar floor 12 feet in the air, walls rising off it in a perfect circle, and Helena Ostergaard standing on top of it pegging a wall plate into a mortise with a mallet, while a small girl danced in a circle around her. Clayton pulled his horse up so hard the animal sidestepped. He stared for a long time. Then he said to no one, to his foreman Hoyt, who was not there, to the tree, to the widow 12 feet above his head, who had not noticed him yet. He said, "That will not hold. First storm it comes down." The words were louder than he meant. Helena heard them. She looked down, slowly, without hurry, without malice, the way a woman looks at a horsefly she has decided not to kill. "Good afternoon, Mr. Ashford." Clayton opened his mouth and closed it. He could not think what to say. He had come prepared to buy land from a defeated woman, and he was standing under a cabin instead. He turned his horse and rode away at a trot, then a canter, then a gallop, and he did not look back. That evening, Grandmother Lishka climbed the ladder for the first time. She walked the full circle of the platform, running her fingers along the inside of the sliding cedar collar. She pressed her palm flat against the living bark of the trunk where it rose through the center of what would be the main room. She closed her eyes. "Your father's hands are in this wood," she said. "My grandmother's oak is in this tree. Both of them are watching. Keep going." Helena did not speak. Matt tucked herself against the old woman's knee. Eric sat on the cedar threshold looking east toward the mountains Matt had named. By the 75th day, the single south-facing glass window was set, $3 from Eugene, wrapped in straw for the wagon ride. Helena herself had carried it the last mile on foot. The small cast-iron stove was installed against the outer wall, stovepipe rising through the crown-cap cedar cone. 6 used cider barrels, 55 gallons each, $4.50 for the lot from a cooper in Eugene, were set under the canopy drip line with hand-cut half-pipe channels guiding the shed water down into them. On the 75th night, Helena, Eric, and Met slept inside the Oak Crown home for the first time. The trunk rose through the center of the main room, alive, breathing. The children lay in their beds and listened. Met said in the dark, "Mama, I can hear the tree." "What does it sound like?" "Like someone breathing slow." Helena said nothing. She did not need to. The tree was breathing slow. On the 80th night, a wind came down the valley from the Cascade Gap. Not a storm wind, a stubborn, gusting wind that pressed on the canopy for hours like a hand testing a door. Helena woke at 2:15 in the morning to a sound. Not a loud sound. A small dry crack that did not belong to any part of the house she had built. She was out of bed and on the porch with the lantern before she was fully awake. The sliding cedar collar on the north face of the trunk had caught. She found the problem in 30 seconds. A knot in the trunk, a knot she had known about and meant to plane smooth and had forgotten, had risen, with the slow inexorable growth of a living tree, into the path of the collar's sliding face. The collar had been pressed against it by the gust-loaded trunk. 3 inches of expansion gap had become 1 inch. The grain of the cedar was starting to split along its pegged edge. If the collar split, one corner of the platform would drop 2 inches. The whole radial beam structure would torque. By morning, she could be standing on a kitchen that sloped. She laid out Henrik's tools on the porch floor. She sent Eric, who had come out behind her in his nightshirt, silent, alert, to fetch the chisel, the rasp, and the small curved spokeshave. She did not send him back to bed. He was 7, and he was the man of this family at 2 in the morning, and he knew it. She worked by lantern light for 2¼ hours. First, she chiseled the cedar collar's inner face back by 3/4 of an inch along a 6-inch arc where the knot pressed. She worked slowly, taking thin shavings, because a hurried cut would split the grain and she would lose the whole collar. Then, this was the part Henrik had taught her that no carpenter in Oregon Territory would have risked. She rasped the knot itself flat. Not deep, only the outer dead layer of bark. She did not touch the living cambium underneath. To wound the cambium would be to kill the tree on that side. To ignore the knot would be to kill the house. She worked with her fingertips against the bark, feeling the temperature difference between dead outer tissue and living inner tissue, and she took off only what was dead. She was Henrik Ostergaard's daughter. Her fingertips knew. At 4 in the morning, the collar slid free. She pushed it through a full 3-inch cycle by hand. It moved like a piston in oil. She pegged the shim she had cut into place as a spacer. She climbed down. She sat on the grass in her nightdress and shook for 10 minutes. Eric sat beside her, not touching, just there. When she could speak again, she said, "Thank you for handing me the tools in order." "Papa said to always hand them in order," Eric said. He said, "That's how you knew the job was serious." She put her arm around him then. Morning came gray. Hoyt, Clayton's foreman, rode past the plot on his way to Sweet Home at 6 and saw a lantern still burning on the platform 12 feet up. He noted it. He reported it at breakfast. "Something's wrong up there," Hoyt said, chewing. Her light was moving all night. Clayton Ashford smiled for the first time in a week. "Good," he said, "good. Then it's starting to fail." At breakfast in the Oak Crown home, Eric climbed into his mother's lap with his bowl of porridge. He was too big for this. He had not done it since Jens died. He did it anyway. "Papa would be proud of you," he said. Helena could not speak for a full minute. Then she said, "Papa would say, 'We fix it and we keep going.' That's what he did with the boat engine in Copenhagen, remember? The piston cracked and he did not curse. He laid out the tools in order and he fixed it. That is what we do." Matt, who had slept through everything, looked up from her own bowl. "Did the tree almost break?" "The tree did not almost break," Helena said. "The tree was fine. The house almost broke. I fixed the house." "Good," said Maddie, and went back to her porridge. The first storm of the October rains came on the 12th of the month. 3 inches of water fell in 6 hours, the heaviest single storm the valley had seen in a decade, they said afterward, and Helena would believe them. The ground beyond the oak strip line turned to churning mud in the first 20 minutes. The Calapooya tributary breached its low bank by the end of the first hour. The Miller farm a mile downstream lost its chicken coop and a quarter of its kitchen garden. In Sweet Home itself, the cedar shake roof of the mercantile's back storeroom gave way under the saturated weight and dropped 40 pounds of soaked cedar onto a barrel of dried apples. On the Oak Crown home, Helena sat at her round kitchen table 12 feet above the ground and wrote in her household ledger. 6 barrels filled in 90 minutes, she wrote. Dripline catchment working at approximately 80% efficiency. Total captured in first inch of rain, approximately 940 gallons. 2 full inches more before barrels overflow to swale. The porch was dry. The oak's canopy, 50 feet across, 1,900 square feet of living umbrella, was shedding water to its strip line with the efficiency of 3 centuries of practice. Inside the main room, the stove held the interior at 58 degrees. Met was asleep in her small cedar bed, with her cheek on a doll Lishka had made from corn husk. Eric was reading by a lantern, a book on Danish shipbuilding Helena had brought from Copenhagen in her trunk. The sliding collar moved 1/16 of an inch in the wind-loaded trunk. Helena had marked a chalk line on it earlier in the week for exactly this purpose. She watched the chalk line move in the firelight, and she thought, "Father, your hands." At 3:15 in the afternoon, there was a knock on the door of the ladder shed below. Helena heard it over the rain. She went out onto the porch with the lantern. A man was standing at the base of the ladder, hat flooded, boots black to the ankles, shoulders hunched against the downpour. She knew him from 20 feet up, Hoyt. "Ma'am," he shouted up. "I beg your pardon. My cabin's gone under. I was walking to town." This was the nearest roof. Elena stood on her dry porch in her dry apron and looked down at the soaked foreman of the man who had tried to take her tree. She said, "Come up, Mr. Hoyt." He climbed the ladder like a man climbing out of a grave. She sat him by the stove. She put a blanket around his shoulders. Matt, waking, brought him a cup of warm chicory without being told. Eric got him a pair of Jens's old wool socks from the chest. For 20 minutes, Hoyt could not speak. He sat with the cup in both hands and watched the steam rise from his boots and looked around himself slowly, at the round room with the living trunk rising through it, at the sliding collar moving 1/16 of an inch in the wind, at the rainwater running down the half-pipe channels outside the window into the barrels, at the 2 children moving around their dry, warm home as if this were an ordinary afternoon. When he finally spoke, he did not look at Helena. He looked at the trunk. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. I have said things in Sweet Home about you that I would like to take back. I said them because Mr. Ashford paid me to say them. I would like the record set straight. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about this house. I was wrong about that tree." Helena did not answer for some time. Then she said, "You are welcome to stay as long as you need, Mr. Hoyt. There is more chicory on the stove." He wept quietly into the cup. Met, who did not understand why the man was crying but understood that he was sad, brought him the corn husk doll from her bed and put it on his knee. "It helps," she explained. Hoyt nodded, unable to speak. The rain fell and fell and fell. The storm did not stop on the first day. It did not stop on the second. By the third afternoon, the valley knew it was facing something most people had never seen: a full 48-hour Pacific atmospheric river, and every cedar shake roof in Sweet Home that had been cut cheap or pitched wrong was failing. Clayton Ashford's 2-story ranch house, the pride of his investment, cedar shake over a shallow pitch a cheap carpenter had cut for him 3 summers before, began to leak at the center ridge on the morning of the 3rd day. By noon, the leak was a stream. By 2 in the afternoon, the upstairs ceiling plaster was coming down in soft, wet plates. His wife Abigail had a cough that was getting worse. His son Theodore, 10 years old, was shivering under 2 wet quilts. Clayton rode to Hoyt's cabin first. Hoyt's cabin was roofless. Clayton rode to the Sweet Home Hotel. The Sweet Home Hotel had no beds. Every traveler trapped by the storm was already there. Clayton rode to the only roof he knew was holding. He sat his horse at the base of the ladder in the downpour for a full 2 minutes before he got down. Helena saw him from the platform. She had seen him turn into the track a 1/4 mile off. She did not go to the ladder. She waited. Clayton climbed halfway up the ladder and stopped. He could not make himself go the rest of the way. Finally, he took off his hat, his expensive Portland hat. which was ruined anyway, and he held it against his chest in the rain, and he shouted up, "Mrs. Ostergaard, my wife, my boy, they need shelter. I know what I have said about you. I know what I tried to do with the debt. I am asking you plainly." Helena looked down at him. Hoyt, who had been on our porch for 3 days and had helped to re-shim the north collar, did not say a word. Grandmother Lishka, who had come up to ride out the storm with them because her own cabin was low and wet, sat in the rocking chair Helena had built and watched. Matt was at her mother's hip. Eric was at her other hip. She said to Clayton, "Bring your family. There is room, the tree says so." He nodded, unable to speak, and turned to ride back for them. "Mr. Ashford." He stopped. "One condition. Name it. You will tell every buyer, every banker, every carpenter, and every loose-talking man in Sweet Home exactly who built this home and exactly how it was built. No stories about the widow who got lucky. No stories about the fool who got away with something. The truth, the joint, the tree, the rain, the design, you tell it straight. Yes, ma'am. And Mr. Ashford. Yes, ma'am. You never touch a living oak for timber in this valley again." He held her eyes for a long moment in the rain. "No, ma'am, I will not." He brought them within the hour. Abigail Ashford, coughing, soaked, her pride gone. Theodore, 10, white with cold. Clayton himself. Helena gave them dry blankets. She gave them hot soup Matei had helped make. She put Abigail in her own bed, and Theodore on a pallet beside the stove and Clayton in a chair by the window. And that night 7 people slept in the Oak Crown home. Helena, Eric, Mette, Lishka, Hoyt, Abigail, Theodore, and the man who had tried to buy the whole thing for $40. At some point after midnight, Clayton came out onto the porch where Helena was drinking coffee. "Mrs. Ostergaard." "Mr. Ashford." He looked at the sliding collar. He looked at the rainwater still coming down the half-pipe channels into the barrels. He looked up into the dark canopy above their heads that was still, after 3 days of storm, keeping them dry. "I did not understand what you were doing," he said. "I looked at a tree and I saw $200 in boards. I am ashamed." "Mr. Ashford," Helena said, "an ashamed man is not the same as a bad man. An ashamed man can become something else. A bad man will not. Go to sleep. In the morning we will talk about the roof on your house." He went to sleep. In the morning they talked about the roof on his house. She drew the corrected pitch on a slate for him. She charged him nothing for the drawing. She charged him $30 in labor for the re-roofing, payable over 6 months, cash. He paid every cent on time. The first winter the Oak Crown home weathered 11 storms. Each one, Helena wrote in the ledger. Each one the sliding colors moved in their calibrated cycles, a 1/16 of an inch, an eighth, never more, always returning. Each one the canopy shed the rain out to the 25-foot drip line. By March the 6 barrels had collected 4,200 gallons of clean rainwater, more than a family of 3 could use in a year. The overflow went to the swale garden and, by May, fed a row of cabbage and carrots Mette had planted herself. Interior temperature through the winter, without a heavy stove burn, held between 52 and 64 degrees. 1 quart of deadfall, picked up from under the oak's own annual drop, not a living branch cut, took them through January and February. They did not run out. They did not come close to running out. In spring, 3 families from Sweet Home came to Helena with drawings of their own ancient oaks. They had seen the Oak Crown home. They had survived the same storm in leaking cabins. They wanted what she had. She charged $6 per design consultation. She showed them the sliding joint. She said, as she had said to Lishka, as she had said to Mette on the scaffold, as she had said to Clayton on the porch in the rain, "It is not complicated. the wood and the tree must be allowed to breathe together. Nails are a lazy man's shortcut. The rest is patience. Clayton Ashford kept his word. He told every buyer and every banker the full truth of how the home was built. He founded, with his remaining capital, a small cedar mill on the east edge of town that only took fallen timber, dead trees, wind throws, salvage, and never cut a living oak for the rest of his life. Hoyt became his foreman there. Mrs. Abigail Ashford, whose cough had broken the night she slept in the Oak Crown home, brought Helena a basket of dried lavender every harvest for the next 20 years. Eric grew into his grandfather's hands. At 15, he apprenticed with a Portland shipbuilder. At 19, he came home and built his own house, a round one, no corners, half a mile upstream on a piece of land his mother had helped him buy. He built it in 4 months. He did not use a single nail. Met became the teacher at the Sweet Home School. Her first class of 7-year-olds learned to identify Oregon white oak from black oak before they learned to spell their own full names. She told them every year on the first day of school about an ancient oak and a widow and a grandmother and a tree that was a neighbor. Grandmother Lishka lived to be 91. She taught Meta the last of the acorn wisdom in her 79th year. She died in a soft sleep in her cabin by the creek, and Helena buried her under a young oak on her own land, a seedling from the crown oak that Meta had planted at age 8. Helena herself grew old on the platform 12 feet up. 2 phrases spread through the Willamette Valley over the next 30 years. The first was a home that grows, used by carpenters, at first as a joke, then as a compliment, to mean any house that worked with the land instead of against it. The second was Helena's own line, taught to her by a Kalapaya grandmother and a Danish father and a son who was 7 and understood. Be a neighbor to what you want to keep. Mothers told it to daughters. Fathers told it to sons. Some of them forgot where it came from. Helena did not mind. Wisdom that keeps its author is only advice. Wisdom that forgets its author is the real thing. When Helena was 58, she sat on the porch of the Oak Crown home on a summer evening with Gray in her single braid and her grandchildren climbing the ladder below. The trunk of the oak had grown 2 inches wider in the years since she had first put her palm against it. The sliding collars had moved 8 inches in that time, smoothly, without once catching again. The oak still stood. So did she. Eric and his wife came up for dinner. Mac came up with her 2 daughters. Clayton Ashford, who was 73 and quieter than he had been, walked over from the cedar mill he still ran with his grandson and sat in the chair on the porch he had first sat in on the night of the great storm. Hoyt was there. Abigail Ashford was there. The small circular room that had seemed just large enough for 1 widow and 2 children somehow held all of them. Matt's youngest, 4 years old, tugged Helen in his apron. "Grandma, why is our house in the tree?" Helena lifted the child into her lap. "Because a long time ago," she said, "a woman listened to a tree, and the tree said, 'Stay.'" Outside, the oak held its canopy over them like an old, patient hand. Rain was coming down the Cascade Gap. The first barrel began to fill. Inside, the family was warm, the end.